careful. Our boy just got shot.
Who shot him?
I don't know. I don't know. Just bring someone here, please.
First responders arrive at an apartment complex and find a young man shot multiple times.
He's gonna be 10-7?
I don't know.
EMTs rush the victim to the hospital, but on the way, he dies.
Danny, y'all see what happened?
I saw two boys running that direction. They ran into that building right there.
We need all four corners covered right now.
Frank 314 to all units responding. Lock this unit down. Let's go. Dulles police. Dulles police. If anyone's injured, make yourself known.
The suspects are nowhere to be found.
Please don't let this be real.
For those most affected by a homicide, the first 48 is just the beginning.
He immediately pulls that gun up, starts shooting multiple times, and it just looked cold-blooded to me.
Nothing was adding up as to why someone would murder Pedro.
This is the story of the fight for justice.
If he did not shoot, it was either going to be his life or Pedro's life. Show me where you felt in fear for your life.
What he said didn't line up.
In the weeks, months, and years after the first 48.
I needed to know, why was my son murdered?
Southeast Tulsa, in reference to a homicide that just went out. When you get to homicide, it's kind of like the pinnacle. And it was my dream since I was about 6 years old, primarily due to watching the Manson murders and the Hillside Strangler case back then. I just remember telling myself that I want to be a homicide detective when I grow up. Well, I hope I have a lot of witnesses. Hopefully that's one right there.
All right, let's do this.
What's happening?
The victim is Fedro, F-E-D-R-O, last name Givens.
18-year-old Fedro Givens Jr., nicknamed Man Man, was the youngest of 15 siblings. He was visiting his sister, who lived in the complex. Fedro was a recent graduate of Union High School and was on the track team.
He was a kid, really, a young adult. And now you're gonna have a family that's missing Fedro forever. We knew that we have a tremendous amount of responsibility to solve this case.
What we have is the victim sitting here with three females. One of them was his girlfriend.
Okay.
Two males walk up, like right around in here. They engage in a conversation that probably doesn't last for more than 10 seconds. And according to the witnesses, the suspect pulls out a pistol and shoots him.
Fedro was shot 3 times in the chest.
It's very rare to have a homicide where it's complete strangers. Based on the fact that there was that interaction, told me that they probably were at least acquainted with one another. We need video from that complex.
I think Lieutenant Watkins or some office.
Okay.
Witnesses who were with Fedro during the shooting will be taken to homicide.
We are gonna go downtown and we're gonna start doing our interviews. I was hopeful. These are gonna be the people that are gonna help me identify the shooter.
All right. First of all, thanks for your patience.
White and Lansdowne interview a 16-year-old friend of Fedro's.
Your mom, your little sister.
When you have young witnesses, you want to make them as comfortable as possible because they are about to relive probably the most traumatic thing they've ever experienced.
You were there, you witnessed something horrific. Tell me what happened.
We all like sit at the little benches because that's where we hang out every single day.
The witness says she was sitting under the gazebo with Fedro, his girlfriend, and another friend.
We saw the boy in the gray hood and then his friend.
When a black male in a gray hoodie and a white male approached them.
And then they walked up to us and then they asked Fedro, they were like,
take your time.
They were like, are you friends with so-and-so? But I don't know what he said. And Pedro, he was like, yeah. And that's when the boys began to turn around. He started shooting.
The shooter was specifically looking for Pedro to ask him about a specific person, which tells me this was premeditated.
Have you ever seen any of these two boys before? Okay. Good, good. Do you know their names?
No. I'm pretty sure they live in Greens of Bedford.
She thinks the suspects live in the apartment complex across the street from the crime scene.
How do you know that they live over there?
It was either last week or the week before. The boy in the grave, he came over there and he gave Pedro a handshake like they were cool. And I was like, who is that? And he said it was the 8th grader that lives over there in those apartments.
Okay. Is that the individual that you saw shoot today?
Yeah.
Pedro told her that the shooter was a student at Union High School.
Do you know if he was having issues with somebody?
No. He was friends with everyone, like literally.
Okay.
Do y'all know if he made it? Everything is good?
He did not make it.
Oh no.
Yeah, he's passed away. I know. The worst part of this job is to give a death notification. If you're not affected by that, then you probably shouldn't be doing this job.
I've broken down after interviewing people before, and in this particular case, it was just absolutely heartbreaking.
I'm sorry.
But at the end of the day, I have a job to do.
All right, sweetie.
3 hours in.
I thought that Pedro's girlfriend would probably be my best bet in telling me if Pedro knows the suspects or not. Tell me what happened.
We were all sitting at the table, and these two teenagers came up. They asked Pedro if he knew somebody. And Pedro was like, yeah, why, what's up? And then the teenager shot him and ran off.
Pedro, had he told you that he'd had any issues with anybody?
No.
I heard a lot of very positive things about Pedro. He was well liked at school. I was a little bit puzzled as to what might have transpired to make somebody want to do this. You know his condition?
No.
He ended up passing away. She was clearly devastated and in shock. Dear, I'm so sorry.
There were now 2 witnesses who did not know who the suspect was or who his friend was.
Yeah, we're very sorry.
Nothing was adding up as to why someone would want to just cold-blooded murder Pedro.
What was going through my mind is the potential of, could this be gang related? Is there an issue over a girl? We just didn't know.
5 hours after Pedro was gunned down.
I tried downloading an hour in every direction.
Lieutenant Watkins delivers the surveillance footage from the apartment complex.
I'm gonna pull this in closer so I can kind of see.
We wanted to see where they came from, what they were wearing, what direction they went afterwards, anything that we could get to possibly figure out who these 2 suspects are.
There's 3 chicks sitting here, and then there's the victim standing around this pole. Here it is. 2 guys that walk up. There's gonna be Pedro right here without his shirt on. And it looks like the black male in the gray hoodie is talking to him. There he goes. He's pulling out the gun. Super brutal. The shooter immediately pulls that gun up and starts shooting multiple times. And it just looked cold-blooded to me.
I remember when he first came home. Man, he was so little. I did foster care for a while, and so someone called me and asked me if I would consider taking a baby. She said it was a little boy. I was like, oh my, yes, I am all boy mom, yes. Coming in, he had a lot of health challenges. He was addicted to methamphetamines, but I was up for a challenge. I told him, you know what, he was a blessing, and 3 months, those withdrawals was over with, and he was that happy boy that we prayed that he would be.
Always had a smile. He loved people.
I remember one girl at the school, Fedro, walked to her and said, man, come on, you ain't gotta sit over here by yourself. She got up and she went over and sat with them, and they sat at the table with their friends, and she said she laughed and she laughed. She said that he didn't know that she had intentions of going home and killing herself because of what was going on at home. She called me to tell me how he changed her life and just his friendship.
He had just graduated from high school, and before he could decide on going to college, it was taken from him.
The night that Fedro was shot, my mind could not wrap around that he wouldn't be here, that he was gone. He saw that gun, but he had nowhere to go. He couldn't turn, he couldn't walk. Within that length of time, you destroyed a whole family. Gone way too soon.
Five hours into the investigation.
It's just cold-blooded, man. This video proved to be pivotal because it shows what happened, and it doesn't appear that Fedro did anything to instigate this. The shooter is this black kid in a gray hoodie. It looks like the white kid might be wearing a Batman t-shirt. We'll have to try to figure out who these cats are.
Then,
our caller picked it up and put it in this quick trip bag.
a resident of the complex found a gray hoodie in a drainage ditch 100 yards from where Fedro was shot.
That looks really close. Let's take it over to the crime scene people. The sleeves had kind of been pulled into the sweater, which means somebody pulled it off in a hurry. Man, I love it.
I automatically thought this suspect had just killed somebody. He was trying to change his appearance because he didn't want police to be able to identify him.
That could be what he was wearing.
"15 hours after Fedro's shooting.
We were not getting anywhere as far as getting to an ID. So we reached out to the school.
Right there. We wanted to see if maybe a school resource officer knows the suspects based off the pictures that we had from the video surveillance.
Okay, I've got a name, according to the security guys here, one that could potentially be our guy that's the white kid.
School security officers provide an address for an 18-year-old student who could be the suspect in the Batman shirt.
We really hoped that we were going to be able to identify this person, and then we would be able to identify the shooter.
I feel things moving and shaking.
The team heads to the possible suspect's address.
How you doing? Okay. We're working a homicide that happened on Friday down the street. We've been told that your son might have been there when it happened.
I'm like shaking.
Ryden shows the mother a still of the teenager wearing the Batman shirt in the surveillance video.
Can you tell me the location? I have Life 360. I can track right where they were Friday. What time?
Say 7 to 7:30.
7:05. It looks like he was out north, Gilcrease Hills.
Her son was 15 miles from the crime scene at the time of Fedro's shooting.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
We follow up on all these leads. None of them actually pan out, and you have somewhat of a story as to what happened, but you're no closer to figuring out who your suspects are.
I was frustrated. We had to go back to the drawing board, and you got to get out there and you got to look for video.
As the first 48 slips away,
pulled 8 hours of video.
It's more footage from the complex where Fedro was shot.
There's a likelihood that they were on foot in the vicinity earlier.
Looking for a white kid wearing a Batman shirt and a black kid wearing a gray hoodie.
Here's two guys that pretty close match to what we're looking for. 3 hours before the crime. Walking northbound, white male on a black male. Size is correct.
What's up?
Hey, Nathan found some video.
Really?
Nathan thinks they headed down the street towards a convenience store.
There's a convenience store straight up the street, which that's what kids do, is they go to the convenience store to go get a drink or something.
This is perfect. I'm 5 minutes away from there. I'm gonna go there right now.
All right, bye.
We were hoping for any kind of video footage that's going to show a better picture of what they look like.
20 minutes later, White texts Detective Nathan Schilling.
Fingers crossed, fingers crossed. It is a Batman shirt. There's our suspect.
I was super excited. It clearly showed who they were, but we still needed to identify them. So there was a lot of pressure there.
I sent it all to Union Public Schools security guys and said, who is he?
Once we had the Quick Trip video, we had to go back to people at the school. We just had to keep talking to people who could possibly know who these people are.
Oh, here we go.
Union High School sends the name and yearbook photo of a student they believe is the black male in the video.
Oh, that's pretty close. We may know who the shooter is, a guy by the name of Caleb Pelton. He's 16. He'll be 17 in a few days.
Caleb Pelton's last known address is located across the street from the crime scene.
I was happy that we had a name, but we didn't have enough for an arrest warrant. We needed the eyewitnesses to identify him at that point.
An hour later,
We're going to meet with one of the witnesses, and Jeff's going to show him these photo lineups.
Lansdowne and Detective Jeff Gatwood head out to meet Fedro's girlfriend.
I think it's back here. Oh, there you are.
Want to have a seat, sweetie? I've got a series of pictures here. There's like 6 of them. If anybody jumps out at you, let me know, okay? Just look at each one of them. Take your time, okay?
Phaedra's girlfriend positively identified Caleb Pelton. It's almost a feeling of relief. We have more than enough for an arrest warrant.
2 hours later,
We're getting ready to execute a search warrant. Patrol's gonna pull up and call him out.
the team heads to Caleb's apartment.
We wanted to retrieve a gun, a cell phone, any kind of evidence related to the crime, and we were hoping that we would find Caleb there as well.
Tulsa Police, search warrant! Come to the door, nothing in your hands!
There's a level of anxiety. We have to get him in custody. We don't want us to be harmed. We don't want him to be harmed. We want to be as careful as we possibly can.
Since no one answers, detectives enter the apartment using a key they got from the manager.
Is he in custody?
Yeah.
We found an apartment that looked like they left in a hurry. And we didn't find any gun, we didn't find any ammunition, and we didn't find any clothing that matched what he would have been wearing.
Gentleman has a ring doorbell.
I saw a Ring doorbell directly across from Caleb's apartment.
The day of the murder, 6:39, they leave. The shooter, he's wearing a hoodie. And then at 7:24, they're coming back without the hoodie on.
Caleb is missing his hoodie that he was wearing when he left, which matched the hoodie that we had found. And we had the other kid that was wearing the Batman shirt.
It was very, very good video. It was a good piece of evidence to find.
So that's really good information.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you. We're gonna turn this over to the warrant squad. We're gonna try to find Caleb at that point. We already knew Caleb's dad lives in California. And so our fugitive warrants guys reached out to the agency out there. They find people that don't want to be found. They found somebody that looked like Caleb Pelton, and they felt confident enough to be able to make contact.
18 days after Fedro was killed.
Caleb Pelton has been placed in custody in California. He lawyered up. He's not interested in speaking. Oh, he has changed his appearance.
Caleb is charged with first-degree murder.
He'll be extradited back to Oklahoma, where he's going to face the consequences. We got Caleb, but we still needed to talk to the white guy that was with him. He was right there the whole time.
The Batman shirt kid, if he helped, he could potentially be an accessory after the fact. We really needed to identify this person and find out what their involvement was.
2 days later, Tulsa PD released the Ring video, asking for the public's help identifying the kid in the Batman shirt.
I'll start looking at this. Alrighty, bye. We got a Crime Stoppers tip in.
A tipster has information on the white suspect.
Huh. I just found him on Facebook. He looks like our kid.
The second suspect is 18 years old.
He lives in Broken Arrow.
Perfect.
They head to his last known address.
We go to the uncle's house, and he gave me the dad's number, which was great because I was able to call the dad.
Let's see what dad says. Hello?
Hey, my name is Jason White. I'm a homicide detective with the Tulsa Police Department. And I was looking to speak to your son.
My son? About what?
About a homicide that he watched happen.
Okay. I'm gonna pick him up and head your way.
Appreciate it, bye.
"20 minutes later.
Okay. I'm glad we're here today. Okay. This is a freaking huge deal. I want you to tell me 100% the truth. You stood next to somebody that just killed somebody. That's important. Either you knew that this was going to happen or this came as quite a surprise. I just want the whole story. Tell me everything that happened. The one thing that I want to hear is I want to hear why. And I'm really hopeful that he's going to be able to tell me that.
Earlier that day, me and Caleb, we smoked. While we were going back, he says, okay, I think I know this dude.
Caleb's friend says as they were walking through the apartment complex, Caleb spotted the victim sitting under the gazebo.
So we walk up, and the dude gave him a handshake. Caleb doesn't give him a handshake back, so then I kind of knew there was something going, like some tension. He asked, you know, somebody. I didn't hear the name. He says yes. He was just kind of standing there. He just saw him 3 times. So I started running towards the tree.
He says he called a friend to pick him up.
You guys get back to the apartment. There has to be some discussion about what's up.
The only thing he said was like, did I tell you that was gonna happen? I was like, nah. He asked me to pee on his hands, and I was like, not peeing on his hands.
Why were you?
Something to do with gun residue or something.
Okay. Caleb wanted him to urinate on his hands. Kind of an odd request, but it's in the internet. I've never heard of that before, and I haven't heard it since. What did he do with the gun?
I don't know. I lived.
Okay, did you see him with the gun before you guys went over there?
I didn't even know he had one.
Did he ever tell you why?
No.
He was confirming things for me. He had confirmed Caleb had a gun. And I learned he didn't know that he had this gun. He didn't know why this had happened. He didn't even know any of the people that were there. Why didn't you call the cops? You stand there and watch a murder like this and you didn't call us.
I'm scared.
I really hope that this is going to be an opportunity for you to change everything in your life. I really do appreciate you coming down here.
Sure.
I was super disappointed with this kid by not coming forward. But mere presence alone doesn't mean that you take the ride for murder.
His story was plausible. It's possible that he did not know that this was going to happen, and I have no reason to doubt what he said.
I think he's going to make for a pretty good witness. He's going to be able to say for sure, all right, he's the shooter. At this point, we're making sure that the case is buttoned up and it's good to go, and that the district attorney's office has everything that they need.
When I first became involved in the case, it had been filed, but Caleb was in California, and he was pending extradition.
It was about 6 months before we were able to get Caleb transported back from California to Oklahoma in order for us to start the process in Oklahoma.
12 months before trial.
I felt confident in our evidence that we could show what happened.
Here's the security footage at the apartment complex.
The video showed Caleb walk up and shoot Phaedra Givens 3 times and flee.
There were the 3 girls that were Phaedra's friends that were there at the gazebo with him when this shooting happened. And then there was Caleb's friend that walked up with him. There was concerns because all 3 of the teenage girls, anytime we would talk to them about the case, they would start crying. They were too scared to watch the video. And so there was concerns if they were going to make it through their testimony without having an emotional breakdown. I was the lead defense attorney representing Caleb. When we first got the discovery, it was very clear Caleb was the one who pulled the gun and shot. That was the cold, hard fact of the case. The shooting was on video, which is never good. The big question throughout the whole process of this case is, why did this happen? And the only person who could explain what happened and why it happened was Caleb. After reviewing the case, Phaedra's girlfriend mentioned to the Tulsa Police Department that Phaedra was potentially associated with a gang in Tulsa.
Do you think this could have been gang related? Okay. Was he blood? Okay.
From the very get-go, Caleb told us that he knew Phaedra. He didn't know him personally, but he had heard about him, and he knew him to be dangerous. You see Caleb and his friend walking. Phaedra approaches them. Caleb, he doesn't know what is on that table, if it's a weapon, but he knows Phaedra to be dangerous. Caleb thought that if he did not shoot, that it was either going to be his life or Phaedra's life. We believed he acted in self-defense, and he should walk out of the courtroom acquitted of first-degree murder. This is the second interview of Phaedra's girlfriend. Detective White and Detective Lansdowne asked about gang activity.
Was he getting into it with any other gang members that you know about?
I know that something happened over the internet.
Okay. So he got into it with somebody on Snapchat about gang stuff.
I don't find it very convincing just because he had a Snapchat beef with somebody that makes him a blood.
No, definitely not. There's nothing that she knows specifically that puts him in a gang. It sounds like he hangs out with people that might be associated. But we knew this would be something that they would try to press on.
Yeah. About a week before the trial, we filed a motion asking for the court to give us the gang certification report from the Tulsa Police Department regarding Phaedra. I contacted the Tulsa Police Department's gang unit.
There was no gang sheet. They didn't have anything on Phaedro. And the judge essentially denied their motion.
It was a setback in our strategy. We're not going to be able to call a TPD officer to testify, yeah, Phaedro's a certified member of a certain gang. And so we had to figure out another way to show the jury that Phaedro was dangerous. Here's another part of the interview of Phaedro's girlfriend, and she says some interesting stuff here.
Let's talk about your relationship with Phaedro. Did anything unusual happen between the two of you in the last month? Nothing.
I know from talking to Detective White, he spoke to people at Phaedro's school, so I knew that there were some rumors out there.
I'm going to bring up a situation. How about him sticking a gun in your mouth?
As a joke. It was nothing.
Tell me the circumstances as to what happened on that deal.
Just hanging out. He grabbed his friend's gun and he was like, if somebody can just snap, that he just show them like what he would do to the person. So he just used me as the...
Like the guinea pig?
Yeah.
It certainly goes to their position that he was dangerous and that supports their self-defense claim.
Yes, but it doesn't change the facts of what happened between Caleb Pelton and Phaedro. I expected that the strategy would be to try to smear Phaedro's character and try to shift the focus from what Caleb Pelton had done.
A year and a half after Phaedro's death, the trial of Caleb Pelton begins.
We were in a big courtroom, and there was a large gallery full of people watching. About 90% of them were there in support of Phaedro.
We wanted them to know Phaedro has a name, he has a face, and he has people that's here to support him.
The entire courtroom was just tense because we're representing a 16-year-old and we're the holders of fate for the rest of his life.
I just remember thinking what happened in his life for him to be sitting in that chair.
After both sides give opening statements,
we called all three of the girls who were eyewitnesses. They were definitely emotional on the stand. I mean, we had to take several breaks because they did break down, but all three of them pointed out, Caleb Pelton, that's the guy who shot Phaedro.
But on cross-examination,
my number one goal was to get across to the jury. Caleb was in fear for his life, and he acted in self-defense.
the defense starts with Phaedro's girlfriend.
In the police reports, there was a mention of Phaedro putting the gun in her mouth. And when I asked her about that, she admitted to that.
That was shocking. I think it painted Phaedro as a flawed victim, and it just seemed like a lot of graphic violence for individuals who are going to high school.
If the defense attorney is successful at painting the victim in a bad light, that is always a concern because the jury could acquit.
The next day, the prosecution calls Caleb's friend, the boy who wore the Batman shirt, to the stand.
He did not seem like he wanted to be a witness. The judge had to correct him a number of times. He didn't really strike me as a great witness.
He testified that Caleb shot Phaedro, and that was the most important thing. And afterwards, Caleb had asked him to pee on his hands to try to remove gunshot residue. This shows he had a guilty conscience. Caleb tried to do everything to cover up his involvement.
Then, the defense returns to the same allegation about Phaedro.
Our main goal when we were cross-examining Caleb's friend was to get out that Caleb was receiving threats from people connected to Phaedro.
According to Caleb's friend's interview with homicide detectives, the threats came after Phaedro's shooting.
Why didn't you call the cops?
So someone that happened used some message that one of his people was like, there was another person also was privy to the family talking about Caleb. And then he was like, whoever was listening, it's just me, because I was, like, it was going to shoot both their families.
Not only is Phaedro dangerous, but obviously the people he associated himself with were also dangerous. They are now making threats to Caleb's friend and Caleb for what happened. We wanted to be able to get that out to show the jury that Phaedro was dangerous. But things didn't go our way. I asked him if he had received threats from people associated with Phaedro, and his answer was, guess so, yes. Someone saying the word guess, it's problematic because then you're testifying to something you're not sure of.
And so because he wasn't sure who the threats came from, that was found to be speculative.
The judge struck the entire testimony about the threat and told the jury that they could not consider it. I believed Caleb. I believed his story. I believed that he was innocent. And it is frustrating that wasn't going to be in the purview of the jury.
The prosecution rests, and the defense calls their only witness.
There's always a risk in putting your client on the stand, but Caleb believed he acted in self-defense. And it was important for the jury to hear it from Caleb.
We had no idea what his story was going to be until he took the stand.
When Caleb got up on the stand, he was nervous. He was a kid. He's soft-spoken. It was hard to hear him.
I can't imagine being in his shoes when he was testifying, especially knowing that there is video evidence of him shooting somebody.
He testified that he knew Phaedro to be dangerous, that he knew him to carry weapons, and that he sold drugs.
You hear the defense making these statements, and you're sitting there thinking, who are they talking about? That's not my son.
Caleb tried to blame everything on his friend, to say that he was the one that gave him the gun. He was the one that suggested peeing on his hands, just to try to move the culpability over to his friend instead of himself.
Staring at the possibility of life in prison, Caleb faces cross-examination.
I really tried to press him. This is your last chance to tell what happened, to tell why you did this.
Phaedro wasn't coming back, so now just tell us why.
He had so much on the line, but he wouldn't say a word beyond it was a female.
He killed someone over this story, and he's not willing to tell anybody what this story is. Caleb was very clear. He wanted to protect the person who was involved in the issue.
I was surprised that Caleb wouldn't give the name of the person because of the stakes. It's his future. Could he walk away if there's a compelling reason?
Part of Mr. Djertsma's cross-examination was having Caleb watch the video frame by frame. He asked Caleb, show me where Phaedro was being aggressive. Show me where you felt in fear for your life.
The biggest point was for me to show to the jury what he said didn't line up with what had actually happened.
Caleb was unable to show the jury when he felt in fear of his life. Caleb was confused, and I don't know that he understood what Djertsma wanted.
After closing arguments, the jury leaves to deliberate.
We had to decide if it was self-defense or not and understand how the law perceived what had happened.
If the jury believes the defense attorney that Phaedro was the aggressive person here and that Phaedro was violent, the risk is that the jury could acquit Caleb.
There was conversation from some of the jurors about what it would mean to send somebody who was 16 at the time to prison for the rest of their lives.
It was very nerve-wracking. We were waiting, and Detective White, he was very reassuring to us. He came out, and I remember him coming out and said, I wouldn't leave and go too far because I don't think it's going to be that long.
Less than an hour later,
Jury came back guilty, murder in the first degree, and the sentence was life in prison with the possibility of parole.
The judge refused to give us a lesser included of manslaughter, heat of passion, so their only option was first-degree murder life. They didn't have any other choice. I do not believe there was justice in this case.
I thought this was a just outcome. He took someone's life, and I think a life sentence is completely fair.
I looked at Caleb, and I seen him looking at his mom, and it bothered me. My son is gone, and now another mother has lost her son to the system. The question I still ask myself today, why did he do it? Why was my son murdered?
For Sandra, I wish we could have gotten her that answer of why this happened, why Caleb pulled that trigger. I hope for Sandra that having Caleb sentenced to life will help her start that healing process, but I don't know that she can ever fully heal in a situation like this.
I was having such a hard time with Pedro's death, and I had been praying and praying, and one day I had a dream. I had the dream that he was in his black car, and when I walked out there, he opened the back door, and he looked at me with that smile, and he looked at me and he said, "Mama, I'm all right." And I woke up, and that's the best I had felt, and I don't know how long, because I was able to see that smile, and I was able to actually hear him tell me he was all right.
Part of the peace that you get after a moment comes from the fact that we know that Pedro was not doing anything wrong.
He made an impact. He didn't get to live long. We didn't get to enjoy him long. But at 18, he did a lot. His memory is still with us. His laughter is still with us. Who he is still a part of us. He's gone, but I know he would want me to continue on. I'm writing a book called Good Grief. It's that we grieve, but there's a good way to do it. You need to be around your family. Those ones that are still there, go love on them. Go be with them.
This is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is entirely coincidental. The desert always looked empty from a distance. That was its greatest lie. By daylight, the endless plains of northern New Mexico appeared silent, washed in faded gold beneath an unforgiving August sun. Heat shimmered above cracked asphalt. Rusted fences stretched toward the horizon. Abandoned windmills groaned whenever the desert wind decided to remind the world it was still alive. But after midnight, the desert changed. It listened, it remembered, and sometimes it refused to let the past stay buried. Deputy Daniel Mercer would spend the rest of his life wishing he had ignored the anonymous call that arrived at exactly 12:17 a.m. The dispatcher repeated the message twice. No name, no callback number, only one sentence. The evidence isn't gone. It's waiting where the train stopped. The line went dead. At first, nobody treated it seriously. Anonymous tips arrived every month. Most led nowhere. Pranks, drunks, ghost stories invented by teenagers looking for attention. This one should have been forgotten before sunrise. Instead, it reopened a nightmare that had haunted Red Mesa County for nearly 30 years. Long before it became known as a midnight evidence case, local people called it something much simpler: the vanishing. On the evening of September 18th, 1995, 26-year-old schoolteacher Elena Marquez finished grading papers inside the small elementary school where she taught 4th grade. She smiled at the janitor before locking her classroom. She promised another teacher she would bring homemade green chili stew to the staff lunch the next day. She waved to 2 students playing basketball outside the gym. Then she climbed into her blue pickup truck. She drove toward Highway 64 and vanished. Her truck never reached home. Her parents reported her missing before midnight. By dawn, half the county was searching. Volunteers rode horseback across dry riverbeds. Helicopters circled abandoned mines. Tracking dogs followed Elena's scent nearly 6 miles before stopping, without warning, beside an old railroad, crossing no longer marked on modern maps. The dogs refused to move. Handlers tried again. Same result. They barked, whined, then backed away. Investigators searched the area for 2 days. Nothing. No blood. No tire tracks. No clothing. No stragel. Only wind blowing through broken railroad ties that hadn't carried a train in years. The newspapers loved the mystery. Teacher vanishes without trace. Cold desert, hot questions. No witnesses. No suspects. Weeks became months. Months became years. People left town. Businesses closed. Children who had known Elena grew into adults with families of their own. Still, the question remained. Where did she go? Every detective assigned to the investigation reached the same conclusion. Someone had made a mistake. Not during the crime. During the investigation. Somewhere inside thousands of pages of reports was one detail everyone had overlooked. Nobody knew which one. Until the anonymous call. Deputy Mercer arrived at the abandoned rail junction shortly after 1 a.m. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds. His flashlight carved narrow tunnels through darkness as dust drifted across the cracked earth. The place smelled of rust and creosote. Half-collapsed signal poles leaned like exhausted soldiers. A freight platform, abandoned decades earlier, stood crooked beside the tracks. Everything looked untouched, dead, forgotten. Mercer almost turned back. Then his flashlight caught something reflecting beneath the platform. Not metal, glass. He crouched, brushed away layers of dirt. An old mason jar emerged from the soil. Inside was a plastic evidence bag, yellowed, cracked with age, sealed using tape that had long since dried into brittle strips. Across the front, faded black marker revealed 4 words. Do not destroy. Mercer stared at it. Police evidence wasn't supposed to be here, especially not evidence from an active homicide investigation. He radioed dispatch. Within 30 minutes, the abandoned rail yard was flooded with patrol vehicles. Crime scene technicians arrived before dawn. Nobody touched the jar until photographs had been taken from every angle. When forensic specialists finally opened it inside the laboratory later that morning, silence filled the room. Inside the bag rested 3 objects. A tarnished silver bracelet, a cassette tape labeled only with today's date from 1995, and a folded evidence receipt bearing the signature of Detective Harold Quinn. The problem was impossible to ignore. Harold Quinn had died 12 years earlier. According to official records, he had never collected those items. His signature shouldn't exist. The bracelet was identified first. Elena's mother recognized it instantly. She had given it to her daughter on her 21st birthday. Investigators had searched for it since the disappearance. It had never appeared in evidence. Officially, nobody had ever found it. So how had it ended up beneath an abandoned freight platform? The cassette tape created even more questions. Its magnetic ribbon had deteriorated badly. Technicians believed it might be impossible to recover. Still, they tried. Hour after hour, specialists carefully rebuilt damaged sections using modern restoration equipment. Static. Silence. More static. Then, a woman's voice, breathing heavily. Car doors slamming somewhere nearby. Wind. Footsteps over gravel. Someone whispering. The recording lasted only 43 seconds. But during the final 8 seconds, another sound emerged. A man's voice. Soft, calm, almost impossible to hear. He spoke only 5 words. She wasn't supposed to run. The recording ended. Nobody inside the laboratory spoke, because everyone understood what those 5 words meant. Elena had not disappeared willingly. Someone had been with her. Someone close enough to be captured by a cheap cassette recorder. Someone whose voice had remained buried beneath static for nearly 30 years. Outside the lab, the news spread with astonishing speed. By evening, satellite trucks lined the courthouse square. Television crews filled sidewalks. Reporters repeated the same phrase over and over. A shocking breakthrough in New Mexico's oldest unsolved disappearance. Families who had followed the case since 1995 gathered outside police headquarters. Some cried. Some prayed. Some simply stood in silence. Inside the building, investigators reopened boxes that had not been touched in decades. Thousands of photographs. Hundreds of interviews, maps covered with handwritten notes, evidence labels faded almost beyond recognition. One detective stopped beside a shelf and whispered quietly, "We missed something." No one answered, because everyone already knew. The question was no longer whether Elena Marquez had been murdered. The question was far more unsettling. Who hid police evidence beneath an abandoned railroad platform? And why had they waited nearly 30 years to reveal where it was? Somewhere in the darkness beyond Red Mesa County, a person who had believed time would erase every mistake was about to discover that the desert had remembered everything. And before another week had passed, investigators would uncover a second hidden cache, one containing a single fingerprint that had never appeared in any police database. Until now, the fingerprint changed everything. For nearly 3 decades, the disappearance of Elena Marquez had existed as a question with no answer, a name on an old file, a photograph on a missing person poster, a memory carried by people who refused to let her vanish completely. But now, inside a modern forensic laboratory in Red Mesa County, investigators were staring at something that should not have existed, a fingerprint. A single fingerprint lifted from the surface of the old evidence container recovered beneath the abandoned railroad platform. At first, technicians believed it was another dead end. The print was incomplete, faded, damaged by years of exposure to heat, dust, and moisture. Most of the ridge patterns had disappeared. A fingerprint that old was usually considered nearly impossible to identify. But the investigators working Elena's case had already learned one lesson. Never assume the past has nothing left to reveal. The print was sent through advanced analysis. Hours passed, then days. The system searched, compared, rejected, searched again. Everyone expected the same result they had seen thousands of times before. No match found. Then at 3:42 a.m., the screen changed. A partial identification appeared. The room became silent. The name connected to the fingerprint was not a stranger. It was someone who had been part of the investigation from the beginning, someone whose name had appeared in the original case files, someone who had spent years standing close to the mystery. Detective Harold Quinn, the same detective whose signature appeared on the hidden evidence receipt, the same detective who had died 12 years earlier, the same man who investigators once described as one of the most dedicated officers in Red Mesa County history. For several minutes, nobody moved, because the discovery created more questions than answers. Why was Quinn's fingerprint on evidence that officially never existed? Why was his signature on a document that investigators had no record of? And why had the evidence been hidden instead of processed? The answers were buried inside the original investigation, a case that many believed had been thoroughly reviewed. But when detectives opened those old files again, they discovered something disturbing. The original investigation was not complete. It was incomplete by design. The first clue appeared inside a forgotten interview transcript, a conversation between Detective Quinn and a local mechanic named Victor Hale. The interview was only 3 pages long. Nothing unusual, nothing that stood out, until investigators compared the date. The interview had supposedly happened 2 days after Elena disappeared, but the recording attached to the report was dated 3 weeks later. Someone had changed the timeline. Someone had moved information around. Someone had altered the official record. The detectives reviewing the file began rebuilding every moment of the investigation, and slowly a pattern appeared. Small inconsistencies, minor changes, details that seemed meaningless when viewed separately, but together they created something much darker. The original investigation had focused heavily on Elena's personal life, her relationships, her friends, her routine. Investigators had searched for someone who might have wanted to hurt her, but they had spent very little time examining the investigation itself, the possibility that evidence had been controlled, or hidden, or intentionally ignored. That possibility changed the entire direction of the case. The team returned to the abandoned railroad platform where the evidence had been discovered. This time, they searched beyond the location where the jar had been found. They searched beneath the old wooden foundation. They searched inside the collapsed storage rooms. They searched every inch of the forgotten structure. 3 hours later, they found another object, a small metal box buried beneath broken concrete. Inside was a collection of items, old photographs, handwritten notes, a second cassette tape, and a map. The map was the most disturbing item. It showed Elena's route on the night she disappeared, but someone had drawn a new line over it, a line that did not match the route investigators believed she had taken. The marked path led away from the highway, toward an abandoned mining facility outside town, a location that had never appeared in the original search records. The discovery immediately changed the case, because investigators realized something impossible. Someone had known where Elena went. Someone had mapped it. Someone had hidden that information. The second cassette tape was examined next. Unlike the first recording, this one was damaged beyond normal repair. But forensic specialists refused to give up. They restored fragments, piece by piece, until a voice emerged. This time it was clearer. It was Elena. Her voice sounded frightened, but controlled. She was speaking quietly, almost as if she knew someone nearby could hear her. If anyone finds this... Static. A long pause. Then, they lied about what happened. The recording stopped. The entire investigation team understood the meaning. Elena had known something was wrong. She had attempted to leave a message. She had tried to preserve the truth. But someone had found a recording before anyone else could. Someone had hidden it. The investigators now faced a terrifying possibility. The original disappearance was not just a failed investigation. It was an investigation that had been redirected. Someone had influenced the search. Someone had protected a secret, and that secret had survived for nearly 30 years. The media immediately changed the story. The headlines were no longer about a missing teacher. They were about a hidden investigation, a buried secret, a cold case reopened by evidence that should never have been lost. The town of Red Mesa reacted with disbelief, because the name now connected to the evidence belonged to a respected figure. Harold Quinn was not remembered as a suspect. He was remembered as a hero, a detective who solved crimes, a man families trusted, a man whose photograph still hung inside the old police station. But investigators knew something the public did not. A person's reputation was not evidence. The only thing that mattered was the truth, and the truth was beginning to reveal something impossible. The man who had spent years searching for Elena Marquez may have been the same person who knew where the evidence was hidden. As detectives continued digging through forgotten records, they discovered one final detail. A report from September 19, 1995, the day after Elena disappeared. A report that had never been entered into the official database. A report containing one sentence written by Detective Quinn. Only 8 words. 8 words that would reopen the entire mystery. I know where she went that night. And beneath that sentence was a second line, added years later, written by someone else. But nobody can ever know. The sentence remained on the page like a warning. But nobody can ever know. For the investigators reviewing Elena Marquez's case, those words were more than a forgotten note. They were a doorway into a hidden chapter of the investigation that had remained sealed for nearly 30 years. Because the question had changed. The mystery was no longer only about what happened to Elena. The mystery was about what happened after she disappeared. Who controlled the investigation? Who decided which clues mattered? Who decided which evidence disappeared? And why had Detective Harold Quinn, the man assigned to find answers, left behind a trail of secrets? The team knew they needed to understand Quinn, not the legend, not the public image, the man behind the badge. They began reviewing his career. 28 years in law enforcement, hundreds of cases, awards for bravery, letters from families thanking him for finding justice. To most people, Harold Quinn represented everything a detective was supposed to be, but investigators discovered something hidden beneath that reputation. A pattern, not of crimes, of control. Quinn had a habit of taking personal responsibility for sensitive cases. He preferred working alone. He kept private notebooks. He stored copies of documents outside official evidence systems. At the time, some colleagues considered it dedication, a detective who cared too much. But in the reopened investigation, those same habits looked different. They looked dangerous. Because when one person controls the information, one person can control the story. The investigators returned to the original police archive. Boxes that had not been opened in decades were carried into a review room. Inside were photographs from the first search, witness statements, handwritten notes, maps, everything connected to Elena's disappearance. But something immediately stood out. There were gaps, large gaps, pages missing from reports, interview recordings without transcripts, evidence numbers that did not match inventory records. It was not random. Someone had removed specific pieces. The question was when, and who had the authority to do it. The answer appeared in an old department memo, a memo signed 3 days after Elena vanished. It gave Detective Quinn full control over all investigative materials related to the case. No outside review, no additional investigators, no independent evidence audit. At the time, it had seemed normal, a lead detective taking charge. But decades later, investigators saw the problem. The person responsible for finding the truth was also the person deciding what information the truth would contain. The discovery sent shockwaves through the department. Because if Quinn had hidden evidence, then the failure of the case was not caused by a lack of clues. The clues had existed. They had simply been buried. The investigators focused next on the abandoned mining facility marked on a hidden map. The location sat 20 miles outside town, a place locals avoided. The mine had closed in 1988 after a series of financial problems. By 1995, it was nothing more than abandoned tunnels, rusted equipment, and empty buildings slowly being consumed by the desert. When search teams arrived, they found exactly what the original investigators should have found decades earlier. Fresh tire impressions preserved beneath layers of dried mud, a broken vehicle part matching Elena's truck model, and inside an old maintenance building, another discovery, a wall covered with photographs. Not recent photographs, old ones, images taken during the original investigation. The investigators froze when they saw them, because among the photographs were pictures of Elena's truck, pictures of the railroad platform, pictures of the places volunteers had searched. But the photographs had not come from police files. They had been taken privately. Someone had been watching the investigation from the outside, or someone inside the investigation had created a private archive. The discovery created a new theory. Maybe Elena's disappearance was never a random crime. Maybe someone had planned every step. The missing evidence, the false timeline, the abandoned locations, the hidden recordings. Everything pointed toward preparation. Someone had known exactly how investigators would search, and someone had known how to stay ahead. The second cassette tape was examined again with this new information. Technicians isolated more audio. The restored recording revealed additional words hidden beneath the damage. Elena's voice returned. I trusted him. A pause. I shouldn't have. Then another voice. A man, not clear enough to identify. But one sentence was understandable. You don't understand what you're involved in. The investigators listened repeatedly. Every word changed the case. Because Elena was not describing a stranger. She was describing someone she knew, someone she trusted, someone who had access to her life. The question became unavoidable. Who was the man on the recording? And why had Elena trusted him? The investigation expanded beyond the original suspects. Detectives began looking at people who had never been seriously questioned, people who had escaped attention because they appeared helpful, because they offered information, because they seemed to be assisting the search. That included former investigators, former witnesses, former community leaders. The case was becoming something far more complicated than anyone expected. It was no longer a disappearance. It was a web of secrets. Meanwhile, the discovery of Quinn's hidden evidence created another problem. Quinn was dead. He could not answer questions. He could not explain his decisions. He could not defend himself. The investigators had to determine whether he had been protecting a secret or whether he had been trying to expose one. because there was another possibility. What if Quinn had not hidden the evidence to destroy the investigation? What if he had hidden it because he knew someone else was watching? That possibility changed everything. The team examined Quinn's personal files again. Inside his old storage locker, they found something unexpected. A journal, hundreds of pages, written over 15 years. Most entries were routine. Case notes, names, dates, observations. But one section stood apart. The final pages. Written shortly before Quinn's death. The handwriting was different. Messier, rushed, almost frightened. One sentence appeared again and again. I was too late. And beneath it, one final note. The evidence will return when the person who buried it believes they are safe. Investigators stare at the words. Because suddenly, the case was not only about the past, it was about the present. Someone had hidden evidence in 1995. Someone had waited nearly 30 years. And now that evidence had returned. The person responsible was still out there, watching, waiting. And for the first time since Elena Marquez disappeared, investigators realized something terrifying. The person who buried the evidence might already know they had found it. The person who buried the evidence might already know they had found it. That realization changed the atmosphere inside the investigation room. For weeks, detectives had been chasing the past. Now they understood the past might be watching them back. The discovery of the hidden evidence had created a dangerous situation. Someone had successfully hidden information for nearly 30 years. Someone had protected a secret through changing technology, changing police departments, and changing generations of investigators. That person had survived because they believed the truth was gone forever. But now the truth was moving again, and someone had a reason to be afraid. The investigators immediately reviewed every person connected to the reopened case, not just suspects. Everyone. Former officers, former witnesses, people who had contacted the department after the evidence discovery, people who suddenly became interested in the investigation again. The team noticed something unusual. Within 24 hours of the news becoming public, several old records were accessed remotely. Someone had attempted to view archived documents. Someone was looking for information. The investigators did not announce the discovery. They had deliberately kept details private. Only a small number of people knew about the hidden evidence, which meant one thing. Someone close to the original investigation was still paying attention. The case had become a race. Investigators were trying to uncover the truth before whoever was watching could erase more of it. The first major breakthrough came from the Journal of Detective Harold Quinn. The final pages contained references to a name that had never appeared in the official investigation. Marcus Vail, a local businessman in 1995, owner of a transportation company, a man who had provided vehicles and equipment during the search for Elena, a man who had publicly offered help, a man everyone described as cooperative. But when investigators searched deeper, they discovered something strange. Marcus Vail had not simply assisted the investigation. He had access to areas of the county that most civilians never entered. He owned property near the abandoned rail yard. He had contracts connected to the old mining facility, and his company had maintained records for private transportation routes throughout the region, including routes near where Elena disappeared. The investigators found no direct evidence connecting him to the crime, but they found something else. A connection, a hidden connection between locations that had always seemed unrelated. The railroad platform, the mining facility, the highway route. All of them were connected through Marcus Vail's business operations. For years, those connections had been invisible. Now they formed a pattern. The investigators returned to the first cassette tape. They enhanced the audio again. This time, they focused on background sounds, not the voices. The environment. The experts isolated several details. A distant mechanical sound, a metal door opening, a vehicle engine, and then a faint alarm tone. The sound was familiar. It matched equipment used at the old mining facility, a facility Marcus Vail had access to. The evidence was still circumstantial, but the direction was changing. The investigation was no longer following random possibilities. It was following a trail that had been hidden for decades. The detectives interviewed people who had known Marcus Vail during the 1990s. Most described him the same way: successful, confident, respected. But one former employee told a different story. A man named Richard Sloan. Sloan had worked maintenance at Vail's transportation company. He remembered the night Elena disappeared, not because he saw the crime, because he saw something unusual afterward. A company truck returning late, a damaged front bumper, and Marcus Vail arriving before sunrise. Sloan said he asked questions, but Marcus told him to forget what he saw. At the time, Sloan was afraid. He had a family. He needed his job, so he stayed quiet for 28 years. Until the hidden evidence appeared. The interview changed the investigation, because for the first time, detectives had a witness describing behavior connected directly to the timeline. But Sloan had one more thing to reveal, something he had kept hidden all these years: a photograph. He had taken it accidentally while documenting vehicle damage for the company. The photograph showed the truck, the same truck from the night Elena disappeared, and in the background, a person standing near the vehicle. The image quality was poor. The face was unclear. But the clothing was recognizable. A sheriff's department jacket. The investigators stared at the photograph. Because if the image was accurate, then someone from law enforcement had been at the scene. Someone connected to the investigation. The discovery created a new wave of questions. Was Detective Quinn involved? Was he protecting someone? Was he a participant? Or was he trying to expose something bigger? The team refused to jump to conclusions. They knew one thing after decades of mistakes. Assumptions could destroy investigations. Evidence had to lead. So they followed the evidence. They examined Quinn's actions after Elena's disappearance. They discovered something unexpected. 3 days after the investigation began, Quinn had requested a private meeting with the county sheriff. No notes were recorded. No official report existed, but a secretary remembered the meeting. She remembered Quinn leaving the office looking angry. She remembered him saying one sentence: "You don't understand what you've allowed." At the time, nobody knew what he meant. Now investigators wondered, was Quinn accusing the sheriff? Was he warning him? Was he afraid? The answers were hidden inside another missing piece of the case, a document referenced in Quinn's journal, a report he called "The File Nobody Should See." Investigators searched every archive. Nothing. They searched Quinn's personal storage. Nothing. They searched old evidence logs. Nothing. The file was gone. But someone had forgotten one thing. Quinn's journal contained a location, not a building, not an address, a date. A date 3 days before Elena disappeared. The investigators checked the records. That date connected to one event, a private meeting between Marcus Vail, Detective Harold Quinn, and someone else, someone whose identity had been removed from every official document, a person who had never been questioned, a person who had never been considered a suspect, because the third person in that meeting was the person who controlled the entire investigation, the county sheriff. And suddenly, the oldest cold case in New Mexico was no longer about a missing woman. It was about a secret powerful enough to destroy the people who try to hide it. The secret powerful enough to destroy the people who try to hide it was finally beginning to surface. For 30 years, the disappearance of Elena Marquez had been treated as a tragedy, a missing person case, a mystery with no direction. But the new evidence revealed something far more disturbing. The investigation itself had been part of the mystery. Someone had not only hidden the truth, someone had shaped the search for it. The investigators returned to the timeline of September 18, 1995, the night Elena disappeared. For decades, the official version remained simple. Elena left the school. She drove toward home. Somewhere along the highway, something happened. Her vehicle vanished. The investigation failed to determine what came next. But now, detectives rebuilt every minute, every phone call, every report, every movement, and they discovered a gap, A 38-minute window. A period of time where Elena's location was unknown. 38 minutes that had never been properly investigated. Because according to the original records, officers believe Elena had never left the main highway. But the hidden map told a different story. The route marked in Quinn's secret documents showed Elena's truck turning away from a highway toward the abandoned mining facility, the same place where investigators later discovered hidden photographs, the same place connected to Marcusvale, the same place that had been ignored during the original search. A question haunted the team. How could investigators miss such an important location? The answer came from an old search report, a report signed by Harold Quinn. The document stated that the mining facility had been searched, but when detectives compared the report with satellite images from the time, they discovered something impossible. The search area listed in the report did not match the actual facility. The officers had searched the wrong buildings. They had been sent to the wrong location. Someone had redirected them. The discovery changed the investigation completely, because mistakes happen. But this was different. This was a pattern. A series of decisions that always moved investigators away from the truth. The team began examining every major decision made during the first year of the case, every lead that disappeared, every suspect that was ignored, every piece of evidence that was never processed. A picture started forming, and it was becoming impossible to ignore. The original investigation had not failed because nobody cared. It had failed because someone controlled where people looked. Meanwhile, detectives continued examining the identity of a mysterious third person from the private meeting. The sheriff's records from 1995 were incomplete. Several files were missing, but one retired department employee remembered something. A name. Deputy Thomas Avery. In 1995, Avery had worked directly under the county sheriff. He handled administrative reports, evidence transfers, case documentation, the exact paperwork that had disappeared from Elena's file. When investigators located Avery, they found him living quietly outside the state. For decades, he had avoided public attention. At first, he refused to discuss the case. He claimed he remembered nothing. But when detectives showed him the recovered evidence receipt bearing Quinn's signature, his expression changed. He knew something. Something he had carried for years. After hours of questioning, Avery finally admitted the truth. He had been ordered to remove documents from the investigation file. Not by Quinn, by someone above him. Someone with authority. Someone who told him the records would damage the department. The detectives asked one question. Who gave the order? Avery hesitated. Then he answered. The sheriff. The room went silent, because the former sheriff had been one of the most respected law enforcement figures in the county. A man whose career had been built on protecting people. A man who had received awards. A man who had spoken publicly about Elena's disappearance. But now investigators were looking at a different possibility. What if the person leading the search had been the person stopping it? The discovery sent shockwaves through Red Mesa County. People who had defended the department for years suddenly questioned everything. Old newspaper interviews were reviewed. Old statements were analyzed. A sentence from the former sheriff's first press conference suddenly sounded different. We will follow every possible lead. Investigators now wondered, had that been a promise, or had it been a performance? The evidence continued. Inside the recovered metal box from the mining facility, detectives found another item, a small notebook. The handwriting was not Quinn's. It belonged to Elena. The pages were damaged. Some were missing, but several entries survived. The final page contained a message, not a goodbye, not a confession, a warning. If something happens to me, look at the people who say they are helping. The investigators read the sentence repeatedly, because Elena had understood something before anyone else. The danger was not coming from someone outside the investigation. The danger was inside it. She had trusted the wrong people. And now detectives had to uncover why. The notebook contained another important detail. A name Elena had written several times. Not Marcusvale. Not Harold Quinn. Another name. Daniel Cross. a local contractor, a man who had worked closely with the sheriff's office, a man who had helped maintain county buildings, a man who had access to restricted locations, including the abandoned mining facility. Investigators searched Cross's background. At first, nothing appeared unusual. No major criminal history. No obvious connection. But then they found something. A payment record. 3 weeks after Elena disappeared, Cross received a large cash payment from a company connected to Marcus Vale. The transaction had never been investigated. The original detectives had never known about it. Now, 30 years later, it became another piece of the puzzle. The investigation had expanded. What began with one missing teacher had become a network of hidden relationships. Officials, business owners, private agreements, buried records. The deeper detectives looked, the more they realized Elena's disappearance was not a single crime. It was a chain of decisions, a chain built by people who believed they could control the truth forever. But they had made one mistake. They underestimated the evidence. They underestimated time. And they underestimated how far investigators would go to find answers. Because the case was no longer frozen. It was moving faster than anyone expected. And as detectives prepared to question Daniel Cross, they received a message that changed everything. A message sent from an unknown number. Only one sentence appeared on the screen. Stop searching for Elena, or you'll discover why she disappeared. The threat was clear. Someone was still protecting the secret. Someone was still watching. And for the first time in 30 years, the person responsible was afraid. The person responsible was afraid. That was the first sign investigators had been waiting for. For nearly 3 decades, whoever controlled the truth behind Elena Marquez's disappearance had operated with complete confidence. They believed the evidence was gone. They believed the witnesses would remain silent. They believed time would erase every mistake. But the discovery of the hidden evidence had changed the balance. The past was no longer buried. And now someone was reacting. The anonymous message sent to the investigation team was treated as a direct threat, not because it contained specific details, but because it revealed something far more important. The sender knew about the investigation. They knew investigators were searching. They knew something had been discovered. The team immediately began tracing the message. The number was unregistered. The digital trail was carefully hidden. Whoever sent it understood how to avoid detection. That created another question. Was this someone connected to the old investigation, or someone protecting a secret they had inherited? The detectives returned to the evidence room. They placed every recovered item on the table. The bracelet, the cassette tapes, the hidden documents, Elena's notebook, the photographs from the mining facility. Each piece told part of the story, but none of them told everything. The investigators realized they were not searching for a single clue anymore. They were reconstructing an entire hidden operation, a series of choices made over decades. The first major breakthrough came from Elena's notebook. Forensic specialists recovered writing that had previously been invisible, a message pressed into the paper from a missing page. Using advanced imaging, technicians revealed faint marks left behind, words that Elena had written on the previous sheet. Only one sentence was readable. The meeting was not what they said it was. Investigators focused on those words. The meeting. The same meeting referenced in Quinn's journal. The same meeting involving Marcus Vale and the former sheriff. The same meeting where a third person had been removed from official records. Detectives searched every remaining document connected to September 1995. They found something hidden inside a financial archive. A payment authorization, signed one day before Elena disappeared. The document showed money transferred from Marcus Vale's company. The recipient was not a person. It was a private storage facility outside Red Mesa, a facility that had been demolished years earlier. Investigators searched historical property records. They discovered the storage building had once belonged to the county, and the person who approved its use was Harold Quinn. The discovery created a new mystery. Why would Quinn hide evidence there? Was he covering up the truth, or was he hiding evidence from someone else? The detectives returned to Quinn's final journal entries. They studied every word, every mark, every unfinished sentence. Then they noticed something. The handwriting changed. Not dramatically, but enough. A forensic handwriting analyst confirmed it. Some pages had been written under stress. Others appeared to have been added later. Someone else had accessed Quinn's journal. Someone had added notes. Someone had tried to change the story. The investigators now understood. Even after Quinn died, someone was still manipulating the evidence. The question became urgent. Who had access to Quinn's belongings? The answer led them back to one person, Daniel Cross, the contractor named in Elena's notebook, the man connected to Marcus Vale, the man who had access to county properties. Investigators located Cross at his home. At first, he appeared calm, almost prepared, as if he had expected them. But when they mentioned Elena's name, his expression changed. Not anger, not surprise, fear. For the first time in decades, someone connected to the case showed a reaction that could not be explained away. Cross admitted knowing Elena, but he denied involvement in her disappearance. He claimed she had contacted him weeks before she vanished. She wanted information. She believed something illegal was happening involving county property. Investigators asked what kind of information. Cross remained silent. Then he said something unexpected. Elena was not looking for a person. A pause. She was looking for proof. The detectives listened carefully, because those words changed direction again. Elena had not accidentally discovered a secret. She had been investigating one. Cross claimed Elena had found documents connected to illegal activities involving land ownership and government contracts. She believed powerful people were involved, people who could destroy her reputation, people who could make her disappear. Investigators asked why Cross never came forward. His answer was simple. I was scared. He explained that after Elena vanished, people around him warned him to stop asking questions. His business was threatened. His family was threatened. And eventually he stayed silent. But then came the question investigators had been waiting to ask. Who threatened you? Cross looked toward the floor. Then he gave a name nobody expected, a name that changed the entire case. Not Marcus Vale, not the sheriff, not Harold Quinn, someone still alive, someone still connected to Red Mesa County, someone who had spent decades watching the investigation from a distance. Cross whispered the name, and the room went silent, because the person he identified had been present during the original search. The person had spoken publicly about finding Elena. The person had appeared on television asking for answers. The person the entire community had trusted. The investigators now understood the most disturbing possibility. The secret had survived for 30 years because the person protecting it had never left. They had stayed close. They had watched. They had waited. And now, with the evidence returning, they knew their time was running out. That night, detectives received another message. Different number, different device, same sender. Only 4 words. You found the wrong person. The investigation stopped, because everyone understood what that meant. The person they were chasing might not be the person who started it. The hidden evidence had revealed conspiracy, but it had also revealed something even more dangerous. Someone had been controlling the truth for decades, and they were still one step ahead. The person controlling the truth was still one step ahead. That was the thought that followed every investigator into the next morning. The case had changed completely. What started as a search for a missing woman had become a battle against a hidden network of lies. For years, Elena Marquez's disappearance had been treated as a mystery. Now it was becoming something far more dangerous. A secret. And secrets have a way of protecting themselves. The investigators gathered every piece of information they had collected since reopening the case. The hidden evidence, the damaged recordings, the altered reports, the missing documents, the names connected to the investigation. Harold Quinn, Marcus Vale, Daniel Cross, the former sheriff. And now, one unknown figure who seemed to have remained untouched for decades. The question was no longer who knew what happened. The question was who had the power to make everyone else stay silent. The team returned to the old police archives one more time. They searched beyond the official files, beyond the reports, beyond the evidence logs. They searched for mistakes, because mistakes were often where secrets survived. Inside a forgotten storage cabinet, they discovered a collection of old photographs that had never been cataloged. The photographs were not from the original investigation. They were taken years after Elena disappeared. The images showed the abandoned mining facility, the old railroad platform, the storage building connected to Quinn. But one photograph stopped everyone. It showed a person standing outside the mining facility in 1998. 3 years after Elena vanished, the person was holding a folder, the same type of folder used by the sheriff's department. The face was unclear, but the vehicle parked behind the person was unmistakable. A county vehicle. A vehicle assigned to someone who was supposed to have no connection to the investigation anymore. The investigators enlarged the image. The answer was not in the person's face. It was in the license plate. The vehicle belonged to the office of the county prosecutor. The discovery created another wave of questions. Why was the prosecutor's office connected? Why had nobody mentioned this before? And why had someone continued visiting the location years after the disappearance? The detectives immediately reviewed old court records. They found something buried inside a routine property dispute, a legal document involving Marcus Vale's company, a document filed months after Elena disappeared. The signature belonged to the county prosecutor, but the real discovery was hidden in the attachments, a reference to a confidential investigation, an investigation that officially did not exist. The team realized they were looking at a second investigation, a secret investigation. Someone had been looking into Elena's disappearance privately. But why? And why had those records never reached the police department? The answer came from a retired legal assistant named Claire Bennett. She had worked in the prosecutor's office in 1995. When investigators contacted her, she initially refused to talk. She said she had spent decades trying to forget what she knew. But when detectives showed her Elena's recovered notebook, she changed her mind. Claire admitted there had been concerns inside the prosecutor's office, not about Elena herself, about the people around her. She explained that Elena had discovered financial irregularities involving county contracts. She had collected documents. She had made copies. And she had planned to reveal everything. But before she could, she disappeared. Investigators asked Claire why nobody had gone public. Her answer was simple. Because everyone thought someone else would. That sentence stayed with the detectives. Because it explained how secrets survive. Not because everyone is involved, but because everyone is afraid. Claire then revealed the most important detail. Elena had not been alone when she collected evidence. Someone inside law enforcement had been helping her. Someone she trusted. Someone who knew how the system worked. The investigators immediately thought of Harold Quinn, but Claire shook her head. No. She looked at the evidence on the table. Quinn found out too late. That changed everything. For years, detectives believed Quinn had been hiding the truth. But what if Quinn had been trying to protect the evidence? What if he had discovered the corruption after Elena disappeared? What if the hidden files were not proof of guilt? What if they were proof that he knew someone was powerful enough to erase the truth? The investigators returned to Quinn's final journal entries. They examined the sentence he wrote repeatedly. I was too late. For the first time, they understood what it meant. He was not talking about solving the case. He was talking about saving Elena. The team searched Quinn's old personal belongings again. This time, they found something hidden inside the lining of an old briefcase. A small key. No label. No identification. Only a number engraved into the metal. 17. The number matched a storage unit from 1995. A storage unit that had never appeared in official records. A storage unit rented under a false name. Investigators moved immediately. When they opened the door, they found a room frozen in time. Boxes, files, photographs, tape recordings, everything someone had tried to erase. And in the center of the room was a single chair. On the chair sat a brown envelope. Across the front, written in Harold Quinn's handwriting, were 6 words. For whoever finds the truth, Inside the envelope was a final recording, a recording Quinn had made before his death. His voice was older, tired, but clear. If you are hearing this, then they failed. A pause. The evidence survived. The investigators listened without moving. Quinn continued. I spent years trying to expose what happened to Elena Marquez. I trusted the wrong people. I believed the badge was enough to protect the truth. His voice became quieter. It wasn't. Then came the sentence that changed the case forever. The person who destroyed Elena's life was never hiding from the investigation. A long silence. They were leading it. The recording ended. Nobody spoke. Because they finally understood. The biggest secret in the case was not who committed the crime. It was who had been allowed to investigate it. And as detectives opened the final file inside the storage unit, they discovered a photograph that revealed the identity of the person who had controlled the investigation from beginning. A photograph taken on the night Elena disappeared. A photograph showing exactly who was standing beside her truck. And this time, there was no question about the face. There was no question about the face. The photograph had survived 30 years of dust, darkness, and silence. But the image was clear enough to change everything. Standing beside Elena Marquez's truck on the night she disappeared was not a stranger, not an unknown attacker, not someone passing through the desert. It was someone who had been trusted, someone who had appeared on television asking for answers, someone who had stood beside Elena's family and promised that the truth would be found. The investigators stared at the photograph because the person in the image was the last person anyone expected. County Prosecutor Richard Holloway. For decades, Holloway had been considered one of the most respected figures in Red Mesa County. He had spoken at community meetings. He had supported the search efforts. He had publicly criticized anyone who refused to cooperate. But the photograph told a different story. He had been there, at the exact location where Elena vanished. The room became silent, because every previous theory collapsed at once. The investigators had spent weeks following the hidden trail. They had suspected corruption. They had suspected a cover-up. But they had not understood the center of it. The person who controlled the investigation was not standing outside the system. He was inside it. The detectives immediately reviewed Holloway's statements from 1995. Every interview, every press conference, every public appearance. And slowly, a disturbing pattern appeared. Holloway always directed attention somewhere else. He talked about unknown suspects, random possibilities, unpredictable dangers, anything except the people closest to the investigation, anything except himself. The investigators returned to the photograph. They enhanced the image, improved the lighting, examined the background, and discovered another detail. Holloway was not alone. Standing several feet away was another person, a person holding a folder matching the missing evidence files from the original investigation. The second person was harder to identify, but investigators recognized the clothing, a sheriff's department uniform. The mystery surrounding Harold Quinn changed completely. For decades, people believed Quinn had been part of the cover-up. Now detectives saw another possibility. Quinn had discovered what happened. He had realized the truth was being buried, and he had spent the rest of his career trying to preserve enough evidence for someone else to find it. The investigators listened to Quinn's final recording again. This time, they focused on every word. The person who destroyed Elena's life was never hiding from the investigation. They were leading it. The meaning was clear. Quinn had known, but he had also known he could not expose the truth without proof, because accusations against powerful people disappear easily. Evidence does not. That was why Quinn had hidden the files. That was why he had left behind clues. He knew that someday someone might find them, and now someone had. The investigation moved quickly. A warrant was issued for Holloway's former properties. Although he had retired years earlier, his influence remained throughout the county. When detectives arrived at his old office building, they discovered a hidden room behind a false wall. Inside were dozens of documents, financial records, private communications, copies of police reports, and one final piece of evidence, a letter written by Elena. The letter was never sent. It was addressed to a friend. The opening sentence immediately captured investigators' attention. I finally know who had been following me. The letter revealed Elena's fear. She had discovered that confidential information from her investigation was being leaked. Every time she collected evidence, someone knew. Every time she planned a meeting, someone appeared before her. She realized she was not investigating a crime. She was investigating people who had the power to erase crimes. The letter ended with one sentence. If anything happens to me, look at the people who were supposed to protect me. For the first time, investigators understood Elena's final days. She was not randomly targeted. She was silenced. She had uncovered something powerful, something dangerous, and someone decided she could not be allowed to reveal it. The discovery sent shockwaves through Red Mesa County. People who had trusted Holloway struggled to accept the truth because the most difficult betrayals are not committed by strangers. They are committed by people who were supposed to protect you. The investigation team continued searching Holloway's hidden records. They found evidence connecting him to Marcus Vale's company. Payments, meetings, private agreements. Enough information to reveal that Elena's discovery had exposed a network of corruption, but investigators still needed one final answer. What happened on the night Elena disappeared? The photographs showed Holloway at the scene. The documents showed the motive. The recordings showed the fear. But the final moments remained unknown. Then investigators found the last tape, hidden beneath the floorboards of the storage room. A tape Quinn had never mentioned. A tape recorded from inside Elena's truck. The audio began with static, then Elena's voice, whispering. I know who they are. A pause, a car door closing, a man speaking. The investigators leaned closer, because the voice was finally clear. After 30 years of silence, they heard the person responsible speak, and the voice belonged to the man who had spent decades telling the world he was searching for Elena. The tape continued, and the final moments of September 18, 1995, were finally about to be revealed. The final moments of September 18, 1995, were finally about to be revealed. For 30 years, the last hours of Elena Marquez's life existed only as fragments. A missing truck, a forgotten location, a broken timeline, 1,000 unanswered questions. But now, inside a small evidence room beneath the old county building, investigators listened to the recording that had waited decades to be discovered. The tape began with silence, a low mechanical hum, the sound of wind moving across the desert. Then Elena's voice, quiet, controlled, but afraid. I know what you're doing. A pause, the sound of a vehicle moving. Then another voice, a man, calm, almost patient. You should have stopped looking. The investigators froze, because the voice was no longer a mystery. It was Richard Holloway, the man who had spent years standing in front of cameras, the man who had promised Elena's family he would find answers, the man who had controlled the investigation. The recording continued. Elena was asking questions, not pleading, not begging, questioning. She wanted to know why people had lied, why evidence disappeared, why everyone around her suddenly became afraid. Holloway's response was simple. You don't understand how this works. That sentence revealed everything about his mindset. He did not see Elena as a threat because she was dangerous. He saw her as a threat because she refused to remain silent. The investigators listened carefully as the recording continued. The conversation revealed that Elena had discovered financial crimes connected to county contracts. She had uncovered documents showing that powerful people were using government resources for personal gain. She believed she could expose them. She believed the truth would protect her, but she had underestimated how far people would go to protect themselves. The tape captured the moment everything changed. A sudden movement. A struggle. The recording cut briefly. Then Elena's voice returned, barely audible. Someone will find this. Those words became the final message she ever recorded, a message that survived when everything else was taken away. The investigators sat in silence after the tape ended, because after 30 years, Elena had finally been heard, not through rumors, not through theories, not through incomplete reports. Through her own voice, the case moved faster than anyone expected. The evidence against Holloway was overwhelming. The hidden documents, the financial records, the recordings, the photographs, the altered reports, the witness statements. Every piece of the puzzle connected. But one question remained. Where was Elena? The investigators knew the truth about what happened, but they still needed to find where her story ended. The answer came from the final pages of Quinn's journal. A location. A place he had never searched publicly. A place he had marked with only 2 words. The beginning. The location was an abandoned water facility outside Red Mesa. A place that had been closed for years. A place no one had considered important. When investigators arrived, they found something hidden beneath the concrete foundation. A small underground chamber. Inside was the final evidence. Elena's belongings, her necklace, her school identification card, the notebook she had carried during the investigation, and a photograph of her smiling with her students. The discovery was emotional for everyone involved. Because after decades of searching, Elena was no longer just a name in a case file. She was finally found. The investigation had reached a conclusion everyone hoped for but feared. The truth had arrived. The arrest of Richard Holloway happened just before midnight, the same hour when the first anonymous call had reopened the case. The timing was almost impossible to ignore. For years, Holloway believed the desert would protect his secrets. He believed the missing evidence would remain missing. He believed the people who knew the truth would stay quiet. But he was wrong. The evidence survived. The witnesses survived. The memories survived. And eventually, the truth returned. The arrest shocked Red Mesa County. People gathered outside the courthouse as news spread. Some were angry. Some were heartbroken. Some struggled to understand how someone trusted with protecting justice could become the person who destroyed it. But investigators focused on one thing. Elena Marquez, not the headlines, not the scandal, not the people responsible. Elena, the woman whose voice had waited 30 years to be heard. The woman who refused to ignore what she discovered. The woman whose final message became the key to solving the case. Years later, detectives would say the same thing about the investigation. The evidence was never truly lost. It was hidden, and hidden is not the same as gone. The New Mexico 1995 cold case became a reminder that time does not erase every secret. Sometimes time protects the truth until someone is ready to uncover it. A forgotten cassette tape, an abandoned evidence box, a fingerprint buried beneath decades of dust. A single clue can change everything. And for Elena Marquez, that clue finally broke the silence. After 30 years, the desert finally gave back its secret. The mystery was solved. The truth was known. And the voice that had been buried for decades finally spoke one last time. Not with anger, not with revenge, only with the simple message she had left behind. Someone would find this. And they did. The mystery was solved. But the silence that surrounded Elena Marquez for 3 decades did not disappear overnight. Because solving a case does not erase the years lost. It does not return the moments stolen. It does not repair every broken promise. For the people of Red Mesa County, the arrest of Richard Holloway was not the end of the story. It was a moment they finally had to confront the truth. The person they trusted had been the person they feared. The voice they believed was searching for answers had been the voice hiding them. And the investigation that had haunted an entire community for decades had finally reached a place where every cold case eventually arrives. The truth. After Holloway's arrest, investigators continued examining every remaining piece of evidence. They wanted to understand not only what happened to Elena, but how it was allowed to happen. They discovered years of carefully constructed deception. Records changed. Reports altered. Witnesses discouraged. Evidence misplaced. None of it happened with one dramatic action. That was what made it so difficult to uncover. The truth had not been destroyed in one moment. It had been buried piece by piece. A missing document here. A forgotten interview there. A decision that seemed harmless at the time. Until 30 years later, those small choices formed a picture. A picture of someone who believed control was stronger than truth, but the investigation also revealed something else. Not everyone stayed silent. Some people tried to fight back. Harold Quinn had spent his final years trying to preserve what remained. Daniel Cross had carried his fear for decades. Claire Bennett had kept memories she believed nobody would believe. And Elena herself had left behind enough fragments for someone someday to follow. The evidence had survived because people refused to completely forget. The final report on the case contained hundreds of pages, but investigators highlighted one sentence. The disappearance was solved because the truth was never completely erased. That sentence became the unofficial conclusion of the investigation, not because the evidence was perfect, not because every question disappeared, but because the most important question had finally been answered. What happened to Elena Marquez? For years, people asked that question with sadness. Now they asked it with understanding. She had been searching for the truth, and in the end, the truth had been searching for her. Months after the arrest, Elena's former students gathered outside the school where she had taught. The building had changed. The classrooms were different. The playground was older. But many people still remember the teacher who disappeared one ordinary evening and became the center of a mystery that lasted half a lifetime. Former students placed flowers near the entrance. Some left handwritten messages. One message simply said, "You were never forgotten." That became the phrase repeated throughout Red Mesa County, because despite everything that happened, Elena's life had never been reduced only to the case. She was more than a file number, more than a headline, more than a mystery. She was a daughter, a teacher, a friend, a person who believed doing the right thing mattered. The investigation changed the way the county looked at old cases. The abandoned evidence box became a symbol, a reminder that forgotten places sometimes hold the answers people stopped searching for. The old railroad platform was eventually removed. The mining facility was demolished. The locations connected to the case slowly disappeared. But the story remained, because some mysteries do not vanish when they are solved. They remain as warnings. Warnings about power, about trust, about the danger of believing that time automatically protects the innocent. Years after the case ended, a detective involved in the investigation returned alone to the abandoned railroad area, the place where everything started, the place where the first hidden evidence was discovered. He stood there for several minutes, listening to the desert wind, the same wind that had covered the tracks, the same wind that had carried away voices, the same wind that had hidden the truth for decades. Then he placed Elena's recovered bracelet inside an evidence archive, not as a piece of a mystery, but as a reminder that every forgotten case belongs to someone. Every unanswered question has a story behind it, and every voice deserves to be heard. The New Mexico 1995 cold case was no longer a story about a missing woman. It was a story about a secret that refused to disappear, a story about evidence that waited, a story about a cassette tape that survived when people hoped it would not, a story about a detective who knew the truth was buried somewhere, and a story about a woman who left behind one final message. Someone would find this. For 30 years, those words waited in darkness. Then one night, beneath an abandoned railroad platform in the middle of the desert, someone finally did. The desert had finally released its secret, but secrets leave scars. Even after the headlines faded, even after the courthouse lights disappeared, even after the cameras packed away and the world moved on to the next story, Red Mesa County carried a memory of Elena Marquez. Because some cases end with an arrest, others end with a question, and some end with the realization that the truth was far more complicated than anyone imagined. The investigation into Richard Holloway continued long after his arrest. Detectives spent months reviewing every connection, every transaction, every conversation. They discovered that the corruption surrounding Elena's disappearance had existed longer than anyone expected. It was not created overnight. It was built slowly. A favorixchan, a document ignored, a warning delivered quietly, a person convinced that silence was easier than justice. The investigators learned that powerful people rarely protect secrets alone. They rely on others, people who look away, People who convince themselves they are not responsible. People who believe one small decision cannot change anything. But one small decision can change everything. That was a lesson written throughout Elena's case. A missing report, a hidden recording, a forgotten photograph, a single fingerprint, tiny pieces that seemed meaningless until they came together. The final evidence review revealed something unexpected about Harold Quinn. Before his death, Quinn had known he might never see the case solved. He knew the people responsible still had influence. He knew exposing the truth without enough evidence could destroy the investigation permanently. So he made a choice. He waited. He protected what he could. He created a trail, not for himself, for whoever came after him. Inside the final storage unit, investigators found one last envelope. Unlike the others, this one contained no evidence, no photographs, no documents, only a handwritten letter. It was addressed to the detective who refuses to give up. The letter was short. Quinn wrote that every investigator eventually faces a moment where a case seems impossible, a moment when the evidence disappears, when witnesses forget, when people say the truth is too old to matter. But he wrote that time was not the enemy. Time was a filter. It removed lies. It exposed mistakes. And eventually, it gave the truth a chance to return. The letter ended with one sentence. Never confuse silence with the absence of voice. That sentence became the final line added to Elena Marquez's case file. A case file that had once represented failure. Now it represented something else. Persistence. The community changed after the investigation. People began asking harder questions. Old cases were reviewed. Missing evidence was searched for again. Cold cases that had been forgotten were reopened because Elena's story showed something important. A case does not die when people stop talking about it. It dies when people stop looking. Years later, a documentary crew visited Red Mesa County to examine the investigation. They interviewed detectives, former witnesses, people who remembered the fear surrounding the case. One question was asked repeatedly. Why did it take 30 years? Nobody had an easy answer, because the truth was not hidden in one place. It was scattered across offices, across memories, across years of silence. But every person who finally spoke added another piece. And eventually, the impossible became possible. The documentary ended with footage of the old desert landscape. The camera moved slowly across the abandoned railroad area, the place where the first clue returned, the place where a forgotten evidence box waited beneath the ground. The narrator's final words echoed over the empty tracks. Some mysteries survive because nobody knows the answer. A pause. But some survive because someone knows the answer and hopes nobody ever asks the question. The camera showed the desert at sunset, the same landscape that had hidden the truth, the same landscape that had revealed it. The story of Elena Marquez was no longer about disappearance. It was about discovery. It was about a voice trapped on an old cassette tape, a voice that crossed decades, a voice that survived every attempt to erase it. And when investigators finally heard those words, they realized something. Elena had not left behind a message of fear. She had left behind a message of hope, a belief that someone would listen, someone would search, someone would care. And after 30 years of darkness, someone finally did. The file was closed. The evidence was archived. The names were recorded. The truth was written down. But every investigator who worked the case understood one thing. A cold case is never truly cold. Not while someone remembers. Not while someone searches. Not while somewhere, buried beneath the dust and silence. The evidence is still waiting. The evidence was still waiting. That was a thought that remained with every investigator who walked away from Elena Marquez's case. Because the most haunting part of the investigation was not the discovery. It was a realization that the truth had been there all along, buried, ignored, almost forgotten, but never gone. Years after the case was officially closed, the Red Mesa County Evidence Archive received a new label, not a crime number, not a suspect name, a name that represented something bigger. The Elena Marquez Archive, Inside were the pieces of a mystery that had survived 3 decades. The cassette recordings, the photographs, the recovered documents, the personal notes. The evidence that proved how close the world had come to never knowing what happened. Investigators preserved everything carefully, not only because it belonged to a solved case, but because it represented a warning. A warning about what happens when power is allowed to control information. A warning about what happens when people believe silence is safer than truth, and a warning that every missing person leaves behind a story. Years later, new detectives entering the department were shown Elena's case during training, not as a victory, not as a trophy. As a lesson, they were taught about the mistakes, the assumptions, the ignored details, the evidence that sat untouched for decades. The young officers would often ask the same question: how did nobody find it earlier? The answer was always the same: because everyone was searching for a missing person. Nobody realized they were searching through a hidden investigation. That was the greatest tragedy of Elena's disappearance. The clues were not invisible. They were simply surrounded by distractions, false leads, public pressure, reputation, fear. And sometimes, the hardest truth to uncover is the one standing directly in front of everyone. The final interview conducted with the lead detective before his retirement became one of the most remembered moments connected to the case. A reporter asked him, "After everything you discovered, what do you believe was the most important clue?" The detective did not mention the fingerprint. He did not mention the cassette tape. He did not mention the hidden files. He answered with something unexpected. The first clue was that someone wanted us to stop looking. The reporter asked why. The detective looked toward the desert outside the window. Because people only hide things they're afraid someone will find. That sentence became attached to the case forever, because it explained everything: the missing evidence, the altered records, the false trails, the years of silence. Someone had been afraid, and fear had created the trail that eventually exposed them. The town changed too. The abandoned places connected to the investigation became reminders of the past. The old railroad platform was gone. The mining facility disappeared. The buildings where secrets were stored no longer existed. But the story remained alive. Families who once waited for answers finally had peace. Former investigators who carried guilt finally understood that persistence mattered. And Elena's students, now adults with their own families, continued remembering the teacher who believed questions deserved answers. Every year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, a small group gathered near the school. They did not gather because of the tragedy. They gathered because of what came after. Because Elena's story was no longer only about what was taken from her. It was about what she left behind. Courage, determination, the refusal to accept a convenient lie. The final page of the case file contained a simple note from the investigators. No dramatic language, no long explanation, only one sentence. The truth survived because someone believed it was worth finding. And maybe that was the real mystery behind Elena Marquez. Not how she disappeared, not how the evidence was hidden, but how a story buried for 30 years managed to return, how a damaged cassette tape survived, how a forgotten fingerprint remained, how a detective's final message reached someone decades later, how the smallest pieces of evidence waited patiently until the right person came looking. Because history does not always reveal itself quickly. Sometimes it hides. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it sits beneath layers of dust, locked away in forgotten places, until someone finally asks the right question. And when that moment arrives, the past speaks. The New Mexico 1995 cold case was solved, but the lesson it left behind remained. Every unanswered case has a voice. Every forgotten victim has a story. And somewhere, hidden beneath the surface of another mystery, another piece of evidence may still be waiting for someone brave enough to find it. The final words written into Elena Marquez's case file were not a celebration. They were a reminder, because solving a mystery does not erase the years before the answer arrives. It does not erase the empty chairs, the unanswered phone calls, the birthdays spent waiting, the families who learned to live with a question instead of a goodbye. For 30 years, Elena's name existed between two worlds. She was remembered by those who loved her, but officially, she was only a missing person, a file, a photograph, a case number sitting among thousands of others. Then one forgotten piece of evidence changed everything. A damaged cassette tape, a hidden storage unit, a fingerprint buried beneath decades of dust, a collection of fragments that proved one thing: the truth can be delayed, but it cannot always be destroyed. After the investigation ended, detectives continued studying the case privately, not because they doubted the outcome, but because some mysteries leave behind shadows. They wanted to understand how such a complex deception could survive for so long. How could so many people believe the wrong story? How could evidence disappear without anyone noticing? How could a person with power manipulate an entire investigation? The answer was uncomfortable, because the greatest protection for a secret was never a locked door. It was trust. People trusted the badge. They trusted the reputation. They trusted the public statements. They trusted the image created in front of them. And that trust became the wall that protected the truth from being discovered, until someone finally questioned it. That was the moment everything changed. One detective asking why. One technician restoring an old recording. One analyst studying a damaged fingerprint. One person refusing to accept that an old case was simply an unsolved case. Those small decisions became the force that brought Elena's story back into the light. Years later, the detectives involved would admit something. The hardest part of the investigation was not finding the evidence. It was accepting what the evidence revealed. Because every case has a moment when investigators must choose between a comfortable answer and the truth. In Elena's case, the comfortable answer would have been simple: a random disappearance, a tragic ending. But the truth was far more complicated and far more painful. The people closest to the investigation had to accept that they had been searching in the wrong direction. They had trusted the wrong voices. They had followed a path designed to keep them away. But they also learned something important. Mistakes do not have to become permanent. A failed investigation can still find justice. A forgotten victim can still be remembered. A lost voice can still be heard. The old cassette tape was eventually preserved permanently, not because it contained a confession, not because it ended the mystery, but because it represented the moment Elena finally returned to the story. For years, people spoke about her. They guessed. They theorized. They created explanations. But the tape gave Elena something nobody else could provide: her own voice, her own words, her own warning. And that was what investigators believed mattered most. She was not just someone who disappeared. She was someone who fought to be heard. The desert outside Red Mesa eventually returned to silence. The roads became busier. New buildings replaced old ones. People who knew the case personally grew older. Some passed away. Some moved away. Some carried the memories quietly. But the story remained. Because certain cases become more than investigations. They become reminders. Reminders that every person matters. That every unanswered question deserves attention. That every piece of evidence has a story. And that time does not always belong to the person hiding the truth. Sometimes time belongs to the person searching for it. The last image connected to Elena's case was not the arrest, not the courtroom, not the evidence table. It was a simple photograph. A picture of Elena standing outside her classroom years before she disappeared. She was smiling, surrounded by students, holding a stack of papers. A normal moment from an ordinary day. And that was how investigators wanted people to remember her. Not as a cold case, not as a mystery, not as a headline, but as Elena, a teacher, a daughter, a person whose story mattered. The case was closed. The files were archived. The evidence was stored away. But the message remained. Someone would find this. Someone would listen. Someone would keep searching. And after 30 years of silence, someone finally did. Someone finally did. But the discovery of the truth was not the end of Elena Marquez's story. It was the beginning of understanding what her disappearance had revealed. Because every cold case carries two stories. The story of what happened, and the story of how long people were forced to wait for the answer. Elena's story carried both. For 30 years, her family lived between hope and grief. They never stopped wondering, never stopped searching, never stopped asking the question that had followed them through every season. Where was Elena? Now, they finally had the answer. But answers can carry their own pain. The truth gave them closure. But it also forced them to face everything they had lost. The years that could never return. The conversations that never happened. The moments Elena should have experienced. A future stolen before it had the chance to exist. When investigators returned Elena's belongings to her family, they handled each item carefully. The bracelet, the notebook, the photographs, small pieces of an entire life. The objects were no longer evidence. They were memories. Her family kept the recovered cassette tape sealed in an archive. They never wanted it to become entertainment. They wanted it preserved. A reminder that Elena's voice survived, that she had fought to leave something behind, that even in the darkest moment, she believed someone would eventually hear her. The investigators who worked the case also changed after discovery. They entered the investigation, looking for a suspect. They left understanding something deeper. A case is not only solved by technology, not by databases, not by advanced equipment. Those tools matter. But the beginning of every breakthrough is curiosity. Someone asking the question nobody else wants to ask. Someone looking at an old file and saying, there is something missing. That was how Elena's case returned. Not with a dramatic confession, not with a sudden miracle, but with someone refusing to believe the silence. The detective who reopened the case later described the investigation as a conversation with the past. Every document, every photograph, every recording, every forgotten clue was a voice trying to speak. The problem was that nobody had been listening. Until now, the old railroad platform where first evidence was found became a symbol throughout Red Mesa County. People visited the location quietly, not as tourists, not as a crime scene, but as a place where the truth finally returned. The desert looked exactly the same. The wind moved across the empty land. The horizon stretched endlessly, and for anyone standing there, it was difficult to imagine that such a small place had carried such a massive secret. That beneath the dust was evidence. That beneath the silence was a story. That beneath the years was a voice waiting to be heard. The investigation also changed how future cold cases were handled. Old evidence was reviewed. Forgotten storage rooms were searched. Unfinished reports were reopened. Because Elena's case proved something investigators had forgotten. Time does not make a case meaningless. Sometimes time creates the opportunity to solve it. Technology improves. People become ready to speak. Fear becomes weaker. And evidence that once seemed useless can become the key. The phrase cold case had always suggested something frozen, something dead, something impossible to move. But Elena's story changed that idea. A cold case is not dead. It is waiting, waiting for someone to return, waiting for someone to look closer, waiting for the moment when one forgotten detail finally connects everything. And that moment arrived beneath the New Mexico desert, a place where everyone thought nothing remained. But something remained. The truth. Years later, when asked what surprised him most about the investigation, the lead detective gave an answer nobody expected. He said, "The biggest surprise was not that we found the evidence." He paused. "It was that the evidence had been trying to find us." That sentence became the final reflection on Elena Marquez's case, because in the end, the mystery was not only about disappearance. It was about survival, the survival of evidence, the survival of memories, the survival of a voice recorded on a damaged cassette, a voice buried under decades of silence, a voice that carried one final message across time. Someone would find this, and they did. The desert kept its secret for 30 years. But secrets are not meant to last forever. Eventually, the truth finds a way out, through a crack in a forgotten file, through a damaged recording, through a clue everyone missed, through the determination of people who refuse to stop searching. And when the truth finally arrives, it does not whisper, It speaks. It speaks. And sometimes the truth arrives decades after everyone has stopped expecting it. The New Mexico desert had kept Elena Marquez's final moments hidden beneath layers of silence. But silence was never the same as disappearance. The evidence remained. The memories remained. And the questions remained until someone finally had the courage to search for the answers. After the case was solved, investigators returned one final time to the places connected to Elena's story. The abandoned railroad platform, the old mining facility, the forgotten storage building, places that once represented mystery and fear. Now, they represented something different. Proof. Proof that the past could be recovered. Proof that forgotten case could still be brought back into the light. The old railroad tracks were almost completely gone. Nature had taken over. Grass grew through cracks in the ground. Rust covered the remaining metal. The place looked ordinary. Almost too ordinary. That was what disturbed investigators the most. For years, the location had held the answer. The world had continued moving. Cars passed nearby. People built new lives. Children grew up. Entire generations changed. But beneath that quiet landscape was a secret waiting for someone to uncover it. The final review of the case revealed another painful truth. Elena had been closer to exposing everything than anyone realized. She had gathered enough information. She had followed the right trail. She had discovered the connection between powerful people. But she also discovered something dangerous. The closer she came to the truth, the fewer people she could trust. Her greatest mistake was believing that the truth alone could protect her. Investigators later said Elena's courage was remarkable. She was not a trained detective. She did not have official authority. She only had questions. And those questions became powerful because they challenged people who believed they could not be questioned. That was why her story remained important. Not because of the crime, but because of the person behind it. A person who refused to ignore something wrong. A person who believed that doing nothing was not an option. The recovered notebook became one of the most important pieces of the case. Not because it revealed every answer, but because it showed Elena's mindset. She knew she was taking a risk. She knew people around her were hiding information. Yet she continued. One sentence written near the end of the notebook stayed with investigators. Those words became the foundation of the entire investigation. Because solving Elena's case required someone to ask again, to question old assumptions, to reopen uncomfortable conversations, to examine evidence that had already been dismissed. The case also changed the lives of the investigators who worked on it. Some admitted they had become frustrated during the process. The evidence seemed impossible. The connection seemed too complicated. Every answer created another question, but eventually they understood something. Complex mysteries are not solved by one dramatic discovery. They are solved by persistence. One detail, one conversation, one forgotten piece at a time. The final official statement regarding the case was brief. It did not describe the investigation as a victory. It described it as a responsibility fulfilled. Because for Elena's family, the most important thing was never the headlines, never the attention, never the story. It was knowing that Elena had finally been found, that her name was no longer attached to the word missing, that her story had reached its final chapter. The years after the case brought many changes. New investigators joined the department. New technology arrived. New cases replaced old ones. But Elena's file remained different. Every detective who opened it saw the same message. Do not assume. Do not ignore. Do not stop searching. Because somewhere, hidden inside an old report or forgotten location, another answer may still exist. The story of Elena Marquez became a reminder that every cold case has a human being at its center. Behind every photograph is a life. Behind every missing person poster is a family. Behind every unanswered question is someone waiting for the truth. And that truth may arrive years later. Maybe through science. Maybe through memory. Maybe through a forgotten object buried beneath the ground. But eventually, if someone keeps searching, the truth speaks. And when it does, even 30 years of silence cannot stop it. Even 30 years of silence cannot stop it. That became the final lesson of Elena Marquez's case. A truth hidden beneath forgotten files. A truth buried under fear. A truth that survived because somewhere, someone refused to let the story disappear. The investigation was over, but the questions it created continued to echo. Not questions about who was responsible. Those answers had finally been uncovered. The deeper questions remained. How many other stories were waiting? How many other forgotten files contained pieces of the truth? How many families were still waiting for someone to look again? For investigators, Elena's case became more than a solved mystery. It became a reminder of the responsibility carried by every person who handles evidence, every report, every interview, every decision. Because a single mistake can change the direction of an entire investigation. And a single overlooked clue can wait decades before revealing what it knows. The old cassette tape became the symbol of that idea. When technicians first discovered it, many believed it would be useless. The damage was severe. The recording was unstable. The technology was outdated. But someone decided to try anyway. Someone believed there was still something left. That decision changed everything. Inside that fragile piece of plastic was a voice that had crossed years of silence, a voice that survived every attempt to bury the truth, a voice that reminded investigators that evidence is not only an object, it is a witness. The final months of the investigation revealed one more detail about Elena herself. Before her disappearance, she had started writing notes for a project, not a book, not a report, a collection of questions. She called it Things Nobody Wants to Explain. Inside were observations about people around her, unusual conversations, missing documents, contradictions, moments when she felt something was wrong. Most of the notes were simple, small details, the kind of details most people would ignore. But Elena understood something. Patterns are created from small things. A single strange event may mean nothing, but when dozens of strange events connect, they become a warning. That was exactly what happened. Elena noticed a pattern before anyone else. She saw the cracks forming. She understood that the people protecting the truth were also the people hiding it, and she made the decision to keep searching, even when it became dangerous, even when she realized the people around her were not who they appeared to be. Her determination became the reason the case survived. Because every piece of evidence recovered after her disappearance existed, because she had taken the time to preserve information. She had prepared for a moment she hoped would never come. The investigators later described that as Elena's greatest act of courage. She did not know if anyone would find her evidence. She did not know if anyone would believe her. She only knew that the truth mattered, and that was enough. Years after the case was solved, a memorial was created in her honor. It was not a monument to the crime. It was a monument to the person, a place where people could remember Elena before the mystery, before the headlines, before the investigation, a place where students, friends, and family could remember her smile. Because every cold case begins with a person, and every solved case should end by remembering that person, not the suspect, not the scandal, not the mystery, the person. That was what investigators wanted future generations to understand. The purpose of solving a case was not simply to close a file. It was to restore a name, to restore a story, to give someone back the truth that was taken from them. The New Mexico 1995 cold case became one of those rare investigations that changed everyone involved. It changed the detectives. It changed the community. It changed the way people viewed forgotten cases. Because it proved something simple. The passage of time does not make a victim less important. It does not make unanswered questions less meaningful. And it does not make the search for truth less necessary. A person can disappear from a world, but their story can remain, waiting, hidden, silent, until someone finally listens. The final recording of Elena was preserved forever. The last seconds of the tape were damaged. The sound was incomplete, but one thing remained clear, her voice, and that was enough. Because after all those years, Elena Marquez was no longer a mystery. She was a reminder that truth can survive, A reminder that evidence can wait. A reminder that even the smallest voice can travel across decades. And eventually, someone will hear it.